Welcome, Western New York photo walkers. This is Chris Reddy. It's Tutorial Tuesday, and we're going to have a fun little meeting tonight. If whether you're watching this live or if you're watching this later on, I'd be happy to hear back from you on whether you found this interesting. Tonight, we're going to be looking at some gear, in particular, some Nikon gear this time. Next week, we'll get into Canon gear, and hopefully the following week, maybe some Sony gear if we can work that out. But tonight we're going to look at some options that everybody should know about their camera. Before we get into it, I wanted to mention that there is a great challenge up right now put out by Arsenal where you can win a free Arsenal. This is a neat remote control and do everything kind of a thing that you can work that will work with your camera, and you can control it in a variety of ways. You can control all the features of the camera remotely. So if you ever wanted to get that shot where you just don't want to go down to a particular place, but you could put your camera there, this is the kind of thing that could do it and could get your get you the photo that nobody else can get. So all you need to do is put a hashtag Arsenal into the post about the whole contest, and you could also win a $25 discount to purchase one of these if you don't win the two that are going to be awarded. So this is going to be a good time and well worth shooting for the theme of Mayflowers and flowing waters. Hold on, we've got somebody that wants to get in the meeting here, and we have some people. Let's see who it all is. There's some people. Excellent. Hello, Mike. How are you doing? Can you hear me, Mike? Okay. Well, we're going to go into speaker view. If you have a question, Mike, feel free to ask any question. Raise your hand. I'm gonna try and stay into speaker view here so that we can present this to the rest of the crew. And let me just get down to speaker full. There we go, speaker view. Okay, I'm going to shrink that out of the way. Okay, move that over there. Excellent. Okay, now let's share that desktop. Here we go. Make that a little bit bigger, and we're going to share this desktop. There we go. Okay. I'm going to share that now. Alrighty, so we're going to be going into your DSLR explained, and what we're going to be doing, I'm going to be talking about several different options with Nikon cameras specifically that may be confusing to you. And some of the things that we all come across when we see these the number of buttons on cameras nowadays, it can get ridiculously confusing. So what we're going to try and do today is we're going to look at some of the controls that are on your camera, try and explain the ones that it may not be real obvious what they are and what they do. And we're going to look at also some kind of hidden things that are real handy once you've got an idea of what they actually do. And we're going to take a look at several different things, several different areas. I'm going to be able to show you my camera screen and the menus in a Nikon camera. And again, like I said, next week, for all you Canon shooters out there, next week we'll be doing Canon and hopefully cover a lot of the same sorts of things, but with more of the Canon specific menus, that same type of things that you'll want to know about, things that will help you in your shooting and maybe are buried so deep that you really haven't had a chance to figure out what that menu does. So we're going to take a look at some of these things first. Now, on most cameras, let me switch to my camera here. Let's turn that on. There we go. So I have a camera here, and we're going to look at some menus. One of the things that is confusing with a lot of these menus is that they go so deep, and quite honestly, I'm still discovering things about some of these menus, some options that I found out one today about 45 minutes ago that I'd never heard of, and I'll show you at the very end. It's just fascinating. Had no idea that the cameras could do it. This is a Nikon D810, and I have it hooked up so I can show you the screen, and I'm going to show you some of the menus in that camera, and we're going to talk about some of the options that may be confusing. So, one of the things that I want to reinforce is that the controls on the camera, you want to make them work for you. You don't have to use them the way they were originally set up by some engineer in Japan that decided, well, in order for you to change your ISO, you should press the ISO button, and it should be placed here under this finger. You can move buttons on certain cameras. You can move buttons and reconfigure what buttons do what on your camera. A lot of times they'll be in the right place and you'll just get used to using them, but sometimes it's real handy when you want to be able to change the function of a particular button to more suit the way you take pictures. So for this particular video, for this tutorial, what I want to talk about is some of the ones that I have reconfigured and moved around on the camera so that it makes it a little bit easier to use. But before I go into that, I wanted to just describe on the camera, however, some of the options that you're going to want to see when we actually do get into the menus. You're going to want to see some of the things that the camera itself is going to want to have up and running. Okay, so let me just switch this so that we can see my camera. I'm going to share. Let's see here. What do I want to share here? There we go. We're going to share that. So everybody should be seeing, hopefully, they should be seeing this camera. Yeah. So I'm going to stop sharing that. Pardon me, I'm doing this on my own here, so it's going to be a little bit oddball here. Okay. So I want to switch the video to that. There we go. Okay. So now, hey Mike, can you tell me which do you see the PowerPoint presentation or do you see the screen, the camera screen? Say that again.
I see the camera screen.
Okay, excellent. Alrighty, it's there we go, Bob. There you are. Okay, so the camera screen itself, I've got it just pointed. I've got it pointed at my keyboard for lack of anything better. But one of the things that I do a lot, that I'll use the live view screen on the back of the camera to be able to verify focus. So if I try and focus on something here, and let me just move my focus over here. I'm going to try and focus on this logo. If I focus on that, the camera says it's got a focus lock. I assume it does because that focus lock box turned green. However, it's really handy, especially in live view and especially in low light when cameras just don't do a very good job of focusing. If I can zoom in real quick. And on my camera, and on most cameras, there's a plus and a minus inside of a little magnifying glass, and it will allow you to zoom in. And if I do that, I can zoom in one step at a time, and it'll get nice and close and blow it up. But it's usually 3 or 4 button presses, and it's kind of a pain. So what you can do is you can take the center button of your multi-controller and you can reassign it and just tell it, when I'm in live view, when I press that center button, the OK button for that center multi-controller, that that tells the camera to show me a zoomed in 1-to-1 view. So if I hit that one button one time, it jumps to a 1-to-1 view. You can actually go to 200% view, but this allows me to confirm focus. I can even focus right in here and tell the camera to reestablish that again. But another single press and it jumps back out again. That is real handy, especially if you're in lower light, whether you're shooting at nighttime or you're shooting a Milky Way or you're trying to shoot in very low light. Cameras have a hard time in low light really trying to establish focus. So with a single button press, you can zoom in on something to a 1-to-1 and then zoom back out. You can check your focus. That's a real quick way to verify your focus. So one of the things that you want to do, let me just do this. I'm going to switch over here. All right, I'm going to share this screen now. Mike, I'm just checking. Can you see the PowerPoint screen now?
Yes, I do.
Okay, great. Okay, so now what I want to do is show you, we're going to go into this, the zoom to check function, and we're going to look at the camera. I'm going to show you what it looks like and how it gets presented on a Nikon camera, and I'll show you on mine. Let me do this here. We're going to go back to this. Okay, share this. Okay, now my video should be that OBS camera. Okay, you should be seeing my screen here. Okay, so I go into the menu and the shooting menu, and I can come down here to the custom settings, and I go down to controls. These controls on this particular camera and on any cameras in the Nikon line, the 7000, the 600 and the 7000 series, and the 8000 or the 800 series, all of those should have these control modification functions. So what you do is you go down there and you tell it, I want to change the multi-selector center button. You press to the right, and you can change it for the shooting mode, the playback mode, or the live view mode. I'm in live view right now, and that's what I really care about. I don't really want to zoom in after I take the shot. What good is that? So I go into live view mode, and I tell it to zoom on and off, and I'm just pressing to the right here. So I can set it to 1-to-1 magnification or actually 200%, either one. I've got it on 1-to-1. I find that gives me plenty of magnification to check autofocus. Hit the OK button, and now that's reassigned so that when I do go in and check my camera, I can press that center button, it zooms in, press it again, and it zooms back out again. That's a real handy function that allows you to zoom in and check your autofocus. You can set up the same thing for playback. So if you have an image on your card and you wanted to zoom in, you could set the same thing up so that it zooms in to 1-to-1 and then zooms back out again. That's in the same place. You just tell it to do it for playback. So another thing, and this is something that Canon users are used to, if I want to review pictures, I can press my playback button and I can go left and right, 1-1, and keep pressing this button, and it's kind of a pain in the butt. Canon users have on a lot of the newer cameras, they have that scroll dial that they can dial through pictures really quick. You can do the same thing, only you use the command dials on your camera. So now if I'm in my playback view, I can quickly jump from one image to another, but just rolling the main command dial. And again, the same thing, you set that up, you go into controls, and you tell it to change the command dials, and you come all the way down here where it says customize command dials. These command dials, you can then say, okay, I want to go to the menus in playback, and I want to playback and change my command dial, my main command dial, and make it do playback and scroll through the pictures, and that's this on function here. So when I go back in And now I use the command dial on the camera, on the back of the camera, and it scrolls through the pictures, and I can go as fast as I want to go. We've got a limited number of pictures on this camera. I inadvertently formatted this SD card, but hey, we've got some pictures. So that gives you the real quick ability to do a real fast image review without constantly having to click that left or right button on the multi-controller. That's a real handy one. Okay, another thing, and this is one of the things that I did earlier, on the camera, and I want to show you this. Let me get to here. On the camera, there is a red marker, okay, right there. Okay, that red marker says format, and it says that here also, on that red marker right next to the trash can. That format option lets you do a quick format of your SD card or the CF card, whichever one you want, whichever's in there. That lets you do that quick format right without going into a menu. You hold down those two buttons, and the display on the top will say FOR. You hold it down a second time, and it formats the card without ever going into the menu. That one I didn't know about until I actually looked at it and tried it. It works. I have an IT background, and I don't like to delete things without making sure that they really are ready to go. So that one you can turn on if you want. I kind of don't want to do that because I really want to make sure if I'm going to format something, I want to look at it first and make sure that it's ready to go. So that kind of a format I find maybe a little bit dangerous, but never knew how to use it until I actually looked it up and said, oh, okay, that's why they're marked format. Makes sense, but there's a trick to using them. A double hold and a double press formats the cards, and you can actually choose the card with the command dial. So another thing that is really handy, and that is you can tell the camera to store the excuse me, there we go. You can tell the camera to store the orientation and what autofocus point you're using based on whether you're in landscape mode or in portrait mode, and it will remember that. You can tell it to remember not only what focus point you were using, but what focus point and what autofocus mode you were in, and it will switch whether you're in landscape mode or in portrait mode. And that's real handy when you go into your controls, and again, into the menu and into controls, and you come on down to the autofocus, excuse me, you come up here to autofocus, and this autofocus store by orientation, turn that on, and it will, you can tell it to either store the focus point and only the focus point, or the focus point and the autofocus area mode. I turn them both on so that when I'm in landscape mode, wherever I have my focus point, it stays. And when I switch to portrait mode, it then jumps to the last focus point I was using when I was using portrait mode. If that gets in your way and you want to be able to move them around freely, it doesn't lock it there. It just jumps back to that and you can move it from there. But that is a handy way to speed up some of your workflow if you're constantly doing this, going back and forth between portrait and landscape. That helps you to jump to that last autofocus point very, very quickly. So handy little mention there. Okay, another thing I wanted to show you here, and that is in the menus, in the playback menu, there's kind of a interesting display here. These playback display options, you have a choice. When I'm looking through when I'm looking through my pictures and I'm reviewing these, I can bring up different information on these pictures that displays a different amount of information. If you don't have those options by just using the up and down on your multi-controller, you may have nothing more than one view, or you can turn on and turn off some of these. And that is in that menu, in that playback menu, these playback display options, you can put a check mark next to whichever ones of these you want to show up. I turn off this RGB histogram because I don't really find that helpful. This is the RGB histogram. I didn't save it. That's always a common problem. There we go. Playback options, focus point, and RGB histogram. Okay to save it. There we go. So when I'm playing back, I have the choice of going into these different ones. This is the one that I just turned on. I don't find this useful at all because a histogram of the colors, I'm never going to do anything with that. However, the histogram itself, the luminosity histogram, that's very helpful. So if you go into the menu and into the playback menu, that top menu item, then playback display options, and take the check mark out of the ones you don't want to include, I find seeing the focus point is very helpful. I find having just a blank screen is very helpful. I also have this highlights where it will turn blinkies on and it will show me where there is white clipping where it's blown out. That tells me whether I need to shoot and change the exposure a little bit. And then this overview is the one that kind of shows you all of your settings for that particular photograph. So I can switch between nothing on the screen, this blinkies where it will show me the blinkies, or this histogram and all of the settings, ISO, the f-stop, the shutter speed, all of that is shown right there. Okay, so that's that one. Alrighty, so let me just jump ahead 1 second here. Okay, another one that a lot of people find very confusing, and that is the ISO settings. And I'm going to go into the ISO settings in the shooting menu. Normally, I will have, in my case, I like to use auto ISO, but normally if you have auto ISO off, all this does is allow you to choose where do you want to start. This camera will start out, its base ISO is ISO 64. I can use this and tell it, I don't want to start that low, I want to start at ISO 800. That's your choice. There are dials on the top that let you change that very quickly. However, I like to use auto ISO, and I can turn it on and off very quickly with the front command dial. However, when it's on, here's some of the confusing things that people, they don't like to use auto ISO because they figure, well, it's just going to raise the ISO to an unacceptable level in all the time whenever you're shooting in darker conditions. Here's the key. These two settings here, the maximum sensitivity. And I always tell anybody that wants to know more about ISO, it's well worth understanding how ISO works. However, the bottom line is every camera is different. There really is a base ISO, and then from there, everything is simply an amplification of that same signal. So ISO will perform better with more expensive components. So more expensive cameras usually do better with ISO and noise in ISO. On my consumer level D5300, which is an APS-C camera, I can't shoot even at ISO 3200. The noise, depending on the subject matter, the noise is just, it's just not worth it. I mean, if I really have to, I can take a picture, but it gets so grainy and so noisy, it's not worth it. However, I have found that on the D810, I can shoot at ISO 6400, and it has no problem whatsoever in rendering great detail, very, very little noise, does a great job. Above that, that's where it really the image starts to fall off the cliff, so I avoid it. So what this setting does is you tell the camera, hey, you can choose the ISO for me, but whatever you do, you're not allowed to go past, and then you pick a number. So the number you're going to pick here, I choose 6400, and this will vary depending on your situation, but a lot of times I'll max this out at 6400 and let the camera, if it needs to, it'll raise the ISO up to, but not beyond 6400. If you want to get even better quality, better image quality, you knock it down to 3200 or 1600. Depends on the camera. However, here's the real key and the thing that confuses a lot of people. This setting, the minimum shutter speed, when you set this, this is in aperture priority mode when you're shooting, the camera will try and lower the shutter speed. In aperture priority mode, you're in charge of the aperture, the camera's in charge of the shutter speed. It will try and lower the shutter speed if it needs more and more light. So it will lower the shutter speed to let in more light. When it gets to this number, whatever you set here for auto ISO, it's only at that point when it hits this number that it will start to jack up the ISO. Before it gets to this, it's going to start at your base ISO of ISO 64. However, I know that just my hand holding, I try not to go below 1/125th without some additional support, whether it's a tripod. If I'm really concentrating, I can shoot at 1/60th of a second without a problem. But I like to give myself a little bit of insurance, and I set this to 1/125th, so that when the camera says, hey, to get a good exposure, I need to go to 1/30th or to 1/60th of a second, the auto ISO setting says, nope, you can't set it lower than 1/125th, but we can raise the ISO all the way up to as high as you want. But it will slowly increment it, and it will use the ISO setting to get you a proper exposure. But it won't go below 1/125th of a second. That's real handy. And I will change this a lot of times if I'm shooting a sporting event or something where there's action. I might set this. I know at the air show last year, I set this at a 500th of a second and told it, don't go below a 500th of a second. If you need more light, need more exposure, start raising the ISO. Works beautifully. Does a great job. You can use it if you want. It does a beautiful job, especially if you're in a fast-paced action and you're trying to get some good pictures and not having to worry about the exposure. Turn on auto ISO, set your base shutter speed, set your highest ISO that you want to shoot at for that particular session, and you're using some of the computational brains in the camera to help you do your job. Does a really good job. So that's auto ISO. Okay, let's go for a second here. One other thing I wanted to mention, and that is this, where are you here? There we go. So the shooting, there is an option on the camera to, if you're shooting a long exposure and either you forgot or you don't want to break out your remote control, whether it's a wired or wireless remote control, you can turn on exposure delay, and it acts the same as a combination of mirror up mode and a cable release. So that exposure delay mode, let me get to the shooting menu. That exposure delay mode lets you tell it to raise the mirror up, wait 2 seconds, and then take the photograph. Raising the mirror up first and waiting a couple seconds eliminates that mirror slap, which can make your pictures a little bit on the fuzzy side, depending on how steady your camera is. So this exposure delay mode, you turn that on and you can tell it, I want a 1 second, 2 second, or 3 second delay. So if I take a picture right now and I press the shutter, the mirror just went up, the camera just took a picture without me touching it. That gives you some really steady camera work with that exposure delay mode. But it's one of those things that you have to remember to turn it off. Otherwise, you'll be trying to take action pictures and you're 2 seconds in between every picture. So you just go right back into that same menu, exposure delay mode, turn it off, and you can shoot at your full, whatever your fastest frame rate is. That's real handy, especially if you don't want to, for maybe just a couple shots, you don't want to break out your remote control. And on this particular camera, because it doesn't have a wireless remote, there's a fitting in the front that's kind of a pain to get at. So a lot of times I'll just use that exposure delay mode, and it accomplishes the same thing, hands-off shooting. Okay? Alrighty. So let me just show you one other thing here. Oh, a couple things, and this is something that I've found a lot of people will have trouble with when they're looking at their LCD on the back and they say, hey, the exposure looks great. Well, it may look great, but you can change the brightness level. You can change the how bright that image is going to be on your LCD, and it may be fooling you into thinking that, hey, I've got plenty of exposure here. It's nice and bright. When in fact, it's really not looking too great. So let's just go up here to the shooting and display mode. And this is where you can tell the camera by pressing the info button. You can tell the camera there we go, how bright you want your monitor. And I can raise it all the way up, and it's not changing on your screen, it is on mine. But for instance, when I'm out shooting a Milky Way, I don't want to ruin my eyes, the night vision. So I'll turn this all the way down to a level 5. But normally I want to leave it at 0. If I'm in bright sunlight, again, it depends on the camera, I might bump that up. It's best to usually, unless it's extreme conditions, it's best to try and leave it at the default setting of 0 so that you have an idea that you're getting a fairly decent representation of what your picture is going to look like. So when I go into the menu and I brighten this up, if I'm looking at the picture, it's going to brighten up the whole picture when it's actually just the backlight that's brightening it up. So if I come in here and go to the playback, if I look at this histogram, the histogram is always going to give me a much more accurate viewpoint of whether my image is overexposed or underexposed, and you should trust that instead of your actual physical LCD display. Okay, just a hint that you'll find that will help your, if you're getting misreading things and you're not seeing the exposure that you thought you had, it may be that the brightness on your monitor on your LCD is actually turned up a little too high. Okay. One thing that I find people doing, and it's nutsing around with the dial on the top, changing the modes, the shooting modes. And about the only time that I want to change this, I'll go into self-timer mode if I want to either get in the picture myself or if I want to leave the camera steady. But in all cases, 99% of the time, I leave this on continuous high, whether I'm taking a lot of pictures or not. So if I'm on continuous high, which is what I am right now, I can shoot a single photograph with a single press of the button. However, if I want to do continuous fast, let me just change this to a faster. There we go. If I want to do continuous fast, I can hold my finger down and the camera will go into that high speed, full frame rate, 5 frames a second, by just holding my finger down. However, if I want a single shot, I can just take that single picture by just a single press, and I'm not having to nuts around with the dial at all. If I'm constantly switching it to single shot mode and then I want to take a burst of several pictures, I got to nuts around with this dial, not worth it. Leave it on continuous high, just get a feel for how quickly your camera repeats, and you'll be able to just leave it there and shoot either single shot or a burst of 2 or 3 or 20, depending on what you're taking a picture of. Okay, so one last thing I wanted to talk about here in regards to the camera itself, and it's something that literally I discovered today, and that is this. It's something called custom. Where is it here? Custom picture control film styles. Now, I had never heard of this before. I found out about it an hour before this started, and I was like, mind blown. So, the custom styles, if you go into the shooting mode, there's these, we talked briefly about image quality and RAW. We all like to shoot in RAW. However, there's this picture control, and this is normally the choices you have are standard, neutral, vivid, monochrome, portrait, landscape, flat. Those are the ones that come with the camera. I had no idea that you can actually add additional modes. I'd seen it, but I was like, oh, I don't want to, what do I know about that? However, and I'll post this up in the group, you can actually add picture control modes that mimic film. Wait a minute. I can have this look like T-Max film or Tri-X film or Kodachrome or Ektachrome, and it will have the same color renditions as close as it can do in digital. It'll have the same color renditions as that particular film type. Fascinating. So if I'm going to switch this down to Kodak Ektachrome and I want to get that look to it, I can now come in and it changes the color profile to match Ektachrome. Now, this only really saves it to the JPEG and the settings in your RAW file. You can change your mind after the fact in the RAW file. Just like if I set this to T-Max, which is a black and white film, and I'm shooting in black and white. Let me choose that so that it's accurate here. There it is, T-Max 400. That is a black and white film. The RAW file still has all the color, but the JPEG and the settings inside the RAW file reflect that black and white film look. And you can load, I think, 10 additional film styles, whether you like Fuji or Ektachrome or Kodachrome. There's a site that has these built. You can download as many as you want, put them on a card, and they just show up in your camera. There's a small process. It just copies it to this menu, the picture control menu, and you can actually mimic some films that you may have shot with in years past. Fascinating. Had no idea it could do that. I'm going to be playing with that a little bit. And you do it through this manage picture control, and you load from copy to camera from the card that's in here, and these are the ones that I have loaded on the card that I can add to the camera right now. Okay, so fascinating. Didn't know it would do that. It's one of those features on digital cameras, always discovering new things about it. I think that's about all that I have at this point to share with you guys about some of the mysteries of some of the menus in the Nikon camera. Next week, we're going to try and do the same thing with Canon, and we'll try and expose some of the mysterious things, especially in those far right-hand custom menus, some of those things that just can get absolutely lost and buried in those menus. Thanks for watching tonight.
Chris, before you go,
yeah.
Rita has a question. Where do you download those files from?
I will post it as soon as we're done here. I'll post it up in the group. Awesome. I'll put a whole link up there, and the instructions go in there. Okay. Alrighty.
Thank you very much, buddy.
All right. Thank you all very much for coming and paying attention. If you're watching this later, if you have any questions, feel free to drop me a note. All right. Thanks, everybody. Take care.